Did you want me to share the screen, or did you first want to share your
Okay,
slides?
go ahead and do your screen share, and then I'll do a quick intro and we'll get rolling.
Right.
Okay, so today is our fourth, I think. This is the April Sydney lectures, and we have Petra Theunissen, who's going to be talking to us today about public relations, relationship building. And she works at the University of Auckland in New Zealand.
Auckland University of Technology, Michael.
Auckland University of Technology, exactly. And she is very experienced at this topic. She will have many insightful things to say. And so I'll let her do an intro, as we usually do. She can give you a brief background about herself and let you know what her position and what she's doing. And then she'll get started on the talk. Just a reminder to everybody that as you tune in, I have the master recording, so you can't really send me private messages making jokes and stuff, because when I look at them, everyone will see them. They'll be on the recording. So we'll be recording this, and so from time to time, it will have may have your picture, or it may have you on it, just so you're aware of that. Make sure if you have a problem with that, you keep it muted. All right? Otherwise, we'll go to Petra, and she can take over.
All right. Hi. Yeah, I spent the last couple of weeks a lot of time on Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings, as some of you will know, Cindy specifically, because we have a weekly Zoom meeting. But it is quite different to do a lecture online, and I think I first would like to just introduce myself and just tell you a little bit about myself as a background. So I was born in the Netherlands, and I was 6 weeks old and when we moved to Germany. And then I went to school in Germany. And I was 8 years old when we moved to South Africa. And then eventually I moved to New Zealand. So I've lived in many countries and I've experienced a lot of different cultures and different backgrounds. And that has shaped a lot of how I think about public relations and about communications. I actually I studied in South Africa, and I'll tell you a little story. When I went to university, I wanted to study psychology. I wanted to become a psychologist. And during the holidays, because, you know, our advisors only really knew about some jobs like doctor, lawyer, teacher. If you were a woman, teacher, nurse, that would be great. They didn't really know about communication because it was a new discipline. And I picked up a book from the university and I was paging through it and I came across communication. I was like, oh my gosh, communication. This sounds exactly what I wanted to do. And so I ended up studying communication. I had my moments where I thought, should I? Shouldn't I? Looking back at it now, it's quite a broad field. It's a very interesting field. And when I look at the world and things that are happening in COVID, I always look at it from a communication perspective and a relationship perspective and the social implications. And someone else will look at it differently. So, and that's a little bit about myself. If you could all just, you know, take a turn and just say hi and say where you're from, because we are a global environment. And I would really like to know where you all are all from, where you are now and where you originate from. So I don't know, I've got under my screen, I've got Michael. So maybe Michael, you want to introduce yourself first. But you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. I am Michael Kent. I'm hosting this series, and I am in Sydney, Australia at UNSW, University of New South Wales. And because we have people working on our house doing construction and finishing up our kitchen, our remodel, I'm probably going to have it muted most of the time, but I'll be here watching, and contact me if you have any questions.
Cindy, you're right under him on my screen. I don't know if you see the same screen as I have.
cool.
Yeah.
So, hi everyone, my name is Cindy and I'm the first year PhD student. My supervisor is Petra and I'm in Auckland now. So originally from China, my research topic is about international students and the cultural adaptation. Thank you.
Anna?
Hey everyone, my name is Anna. I am from Russia originally. That's where I lived pretty much all my life. But then I came to the United States and now I'm at the University of Tennessee doing my PhD in public relations. And my research interest is community engagement, that's the main one, public relations theory in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Rebecca, you're next on my screen.
Yes, I will actually, I'll be brave and do the video again. Okay, I worked out like 5 minutes ago, so I just ran. I apologize for the way that I look, but I didn't want to miss this. My name is Rebecca Gilliland. I teach at the University of Indianapolis, and I actually, in 8 days, I assume the chairship there too. So I'll be the chair of our Department of Communication. I teach public relations primarily, I think I already said that, and I focus a lot on practical work, such as work with our student-run public relations, or our student-run PR firm, sorry. And I met Petra a while ago, and I had the good fortune of actually visiting AUT and working just briefly there with her and the team there.
Yes, we met at an ICA conference, right?
Yes, in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you, Rebecca.
I'm hiding myself again.
All right. Raul.
Morning, everyone. My name is Rahul. I am one of Petra's postgrad diploma students from AUT.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Erin? Oh, Erin.
I'm Erin Riley. I'm a PhD student at University of Technology, Sydney. My supervisor is Maureen Taylor, and my interest is in community engagement, particularly with people who are the losers, for want of a better word, in public policy decisions.
Oh, you just saw the message, didn't you? Yeah. Thank you, Erin. Next one. Oh, the screen changed. Okay. Kim.
Hello, Kim Johnston. I'm at Queensland University of Technology in beautiful Brisbane, Australia. And I was very fortunate to go and visit Petra in AUT when they launched their book. So I was very fortunate to do that. And I'm really looking forward to your seminar today, Petra.
And you're going to keep your questions simple, right?
Well, I'm actually really concerned because I'm also renovating my house and the electricians have told me that I'm going to lose power in about 15 minutes now. So if I drop out, I will be back.
Okay, so I won't take it personally then.
No, don't take it personally.
Okay. Shima. Is it Shima? Oh, you don't have your mic on, Shima. There you go.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Do you have my voice now?
Yes.
I'm Shima. I'm a PhD student at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and I'm Michael's student. My research topic is on how voluntary activist groups use rhetoric to build relationship and build social capital. And I'm originally from Iran.
Thank you. Prashant?
Hi, everybody. I'm Prashant and I'm from India. Currently, I'm studying in AUT. I'm doing my postgraduate diploma in communication studies. I'm also one of Petra's student. Next week, we start our classes. So this is a good sort of a prelude to get into that. Looking forward to the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. There's Shima again. I don't know if that's...
Shima,
that's me. Yeah, that's me. I'm connecting with my phone and also with my PC.
Oh, okay. All right. And Lisa.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa. I'm originally from Hong Kong. I did my PhD in the United States, and I'm currently a lecturer in advertising and public relations at the QUT Business School in Brisbane, Australia. So Anne and Kim are my colleagues. And one of my research interests is the application of public relations in the context of public diplomacy.
Okay, thank you. Sharon?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon. I'm also originally from Hong Kong, and I did my undergrad in the States and my master's in London and Hong Kong. And right now I'm working in public relations in Auckland, as well as I'm a postgrad student in Petra's PR class.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Anne, I see you've got a picture of a cat.
That is not just a cat, Petra. That is Princess Angel Baby Flossie Golightly, also known as Professor Cat. She's a critical scholar, but hey, enough about her. My name's Anne. I also work at Queensland University of Technology. My central area of interest is in dialogue and then close associations with topics such as engagement and branching out into storytelling, working a lot with Michael because he's pretty cool to work with, working heaps with Kim because she's also pretty cool to work with. I think those are the main people who've paid me to say nice things about them, but I'll also say nice things about working with Lisa Tam because she's just fabulous. Okay, that's me, done. I will have to nick out soon because yes, I've got people to take to doctors and things, but I'm here in spirit.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Jenny.
Hi, Jenny Robinson. Let me see if I can get to my video. You never know. Apologies, I'm cutting across between another full day intensive in strategic management and this one as well. So let's see how that goes. Jenny Robinson, I'm now at RMIT University in Melbourne. I'm a senior lecturer and have several HDR students in public relations or related areas and fields. And so I have encouraged them to come along, and we are using some of these lectures as discussion points to increase their theory and their ability to go across fundamental theories in the area. My background is in primarily risk and crisis science communication, but I also did my PhD at Alabama, taught at the University of Florida for a few years before doing some audience research, relationship building and advocacy work. And of course, now at RMIT. So just enjoying it, and thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've covered everyone, have I? Did I leave anyone out? No? There's no response, so I assume that I haven't left anyone out. Okay.
Tim Swanson is on now.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. Tim?
Tim, you there? Could have gone to get coffee.
Okay.
I hear a lot of students are logging on and then walking off and leaving their computer, so it looks like they're there.
It's all right. Let's maybe move on. So let's go. Oh, why doesn't it work? Okay, there we go. So I'm just repeating what Michael said earlier, is just to keep your mics muted, because for the simple reason is that it does, interrupt, and we can get feedback as well. You can keep your video off if you want, because most of you are in your spaces in home, as we call it in New Zealand, your bubbles, because we live in bubbles. Raise your hand if you want to say something. I'm not quite sure where it is on the screen. Michael can tell you, but I learned the hard way that there's a great chat function for this, because I kind of interrupted Kim in her lecture. I still apologize for that one. But yeah, if you want to ask or say something, just raise your hand. Michael is a moderator, so hopefully he will tell me when someone wants to ask a question if I don't see it. And please don't be afraid to share. It's okay to have different viewpoints. That's why I introduced myself to start off as well, because we all come from different perspectives and different viewpoints, and I will talk about some of these and how that influences how we see relationships or public relations. And although it's a public space, it's also a safe space for you to learn. Here at AUT, at Auckland University of Technology, we like the idea of creating safe spaces where you can just share your ideas and enhance your understanding. So that's what I hope to achieve here as well. Not sure if we can, but we're going to try. Okay, so I want to start with something. If you have a piece of paper nearby, if you can do that on a piece of paper, that would be great, and you can hold it up later at the screen when I ask you to. Otherwise, you can just shout out what you thought. But what I want you to think about is when you think about relationships. By the way, Michael, can I just interrupt for a second? Do you see my PowerPoint, or do you see the people on the side as well?
I see both because I have it set up with everybody on the side, and then the screen is your slides.
Okay, because my slides on the side, my videos are on the side, and that works for me, but I'm just worried that it might interrupt the PowerPoint presentation.
I've got your slides that's got reflection on the black and white text on the left, and then a black and white picture on the right with a light bulb and a guy and a pen, and then I've got smaller shots of all the speakers on the right.
Oh, so you do see that. Okay. I'm just wondering if I should move that to the top. There we go. Alrighty. So if you think for a moment, what image or word springs to mind when you think of relationships? So I'm going to ask you if you have got a pen or paper and you can draw something, or if you can just say out loud. So shall I go down the list again? I'll skip Michael for now because I don't want him to have to do all the work all the time. I'll do Jenny. Jenny, is there a word or image that springs to mind?
Dynamic, engaging, I think springs to mind, that it's an interaction.
Yeah, dynamic, engaging, it's an interaction. Lisa?
So in my imagination of relationships, there would be two entities, such as an organization and publics, or two organizations, and there would be arrows pointing at each other, and these arrows would represent things like mutual expectations, mutual understanding, mutual influence, and mutual benefits.
Okay, so you have arrows pointing at each other and mutual understanding, mutual benefits, and so it's quite complex, really, isn't it?
That's right. Yep.
Is it just two people?
Yeah, so I learned from the from Aime's lecture that there can be more than two people, that we can understand relationships as a network of relationships, but I haven't explored that in my research yet.
Okay, cool. Sharon? You know I'm going down the list, right?
Sorry. Hi. So in my head, in my mind, I immediately think of like a network of strings and everything interconnected. And also some adjectives that spring into mind include like building rapport and building building something together, and seeing each other's point of view and respecting other people's model of the world. So that's what springs to mind.
Okay, yeah. I'm just going down the list here. Erin?
I did a drawing. There we go.
I just hold it up. Yeah.
There we go. So I have the word mutual in it.
Yeah.
And then it's got two people with their own ideas but having a conversation. And then there's other people around.
Okay, so a lot of it has got to do with communication, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Cindy?
Yes. So I think the relationship it's really depends. So mostly we mention like as someone mentioned before, like it's mutual benefits and an organization like government or university like to the students, and sometimes it's individual to individual, organization to organization, or organization to individuals.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, Anna. Sorry, I have to scroll down the side. I'm sure you can see my screen there.
Yeah. Well, I have a little bit of a different view of a relationship. Yes, there is this understanding that it's something good and mutual interest, consensus, respect, expectations. But if we talk outside of the theory, just about kind of visualization, and from my own experience, to me, a relationship is something you need to work on, kind of something that you need to do, and it's actually very difficult. And you realize that you have a relationship either when you have a problem, like, my gosh, we have a bad relationships with this person, and you have to do something and kind of, build it out and work it out and improve it somehow. Or you realize that you have a relationship when you need something from this person, you can rely on this person and kind of, and okay, I have a good relationship with this person, so I probably can get something from him or from her. So this is kind of my understanding, visualization of relationship outside of the theory.
It's quite complex, isn't it? It's quite hard to actually visualize it. Shima.
This is my image.
Oh,
Yeah. So there are two parties that can be public relation practitioners with public relations practitioners, or PR practitioners with journalists, or PR practitioners with people in groups of publics. And as you can see, these two parties are within their networks of relationships.
Okay. And looks a bit like a communication model as well. So I see some communication in there. Rebecca, let's see what you think of. Did you draw us a picture, Rebecca?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you'd muted it.
Hello. Okay, all right. I am going to go pretty simplistic and say that the two adjectives that I think of are two-way and reciprocal. And to me, that encompasses everything about a relationship, whether it be communication, effort, respect, whatever. But those are the two words that I can boil it down to.
Okay, thank you. Raul?
Hi. So according to me, I think communication would be something like it can be between two people, an organization, or a person, or between two organizations. But I think the main thing that communications covers, that relationship covers, is you need to be able to communicate between the two entities, as well as the main aim of it should be for mutual benefit, as in for growth as well as mutual benefit for both of them.
Okay, thank you. Prashant?
Hi. Okay, so I have been listening to a lot of podcasts, and one thing that I've realized about relationships specifically is the fact how when two people get talking with each other for maybe an hour, it's weird because it indirectly makes a relationship with me that I'm a part of their conversation, and so it does with thousands of others who are listening. There are conflicts, there are disagreements, there are agreements, there are laughs. It's just a weird sort of a dynamic and a symbiosis of relationship that establishes with everyone. Podcasts is something I relate to relationships right now.
Interesting. Yeah. Haria, you just joined us. Do you want to talk about what you think is a relationship?
Yes, can do. Hi, Petra. It took me 15 minutes to find you, but I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So essentially, I thought, well, when I look at the word relationship, three things spring to mind. So I've got this idea of it involving two parties, and heart pops up in my head. And by heart, I mean to want to have a relationship, to want to have a care and concern for another. And the other image that pops to mind was hand. So hand symbolized to me a handshake. So it's the wanting to have a connection for a reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny, did I ask you? Jenny, have I already asked you about relationship? Okay.
Yes, you did. Sorry. I have it over on a third screen.
All right. Erin, did I ask you?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So I think then I've asked everyone. I'm just trying to get this a bit down. Okay. So I want to share that what reflects a bit what you all have said at some or other point is about relationships. Is what I picked up with most of you is it's got to do with people. So the majority of you saw it as people. And that's how I see it as well. So I'm going to share some of my visuals that I was thinking of relationships and in a professional setting, because that's what I'm going to talk about as well. It's between people and sometimes it's difficult. However, some of you might have thought your first reaction of relationship is that maybe it's like, I smiled at Haria's heart because, you know, it's like, you know, a relationship like that, because when you search on Google, for instance, you look on a relationship, you usually get that type of image, a relationship between people, an intimate relationship. But that's not the relationship that I'm going to talk about today, because ideally in the workplace, we shouldn't, in a professional setting, have many intimate relationships. What I did pick up that many of you also mentioned is complexity. Relationships are very complex, and I thought that this image would represent it quite nicely. I also, in terms of words, I thought people, communication, and complex. Those are the three things when I think of relationships that come to mind. Now, if you talk to someone else who hasn't studied communication and who's not in our field, then they might think of relationships in terms of between things. And some of you, maybe you've come from a science background, might think of relationships between atoms, for instance, or a relationship between a mathematical formula. So you might think of relationship in quite a different context. But because I come from communication, to me, it's always about people. And as I said to you, I wanted to study psychology. And to me, communication is an application of psychology. It's an application of understanding people. So for me, it's all about people, whatever I do. Now, the literature on relationships in public relations, because really it's about public relations as well, not just communication, but where I am, I'm lucky, I suppose. I come from a communication background and I'm working in the School of Communication Studies. So it's about when we look at public relations, it's in communications. It's not in business, it's not in management, it's in communications. So we focus a lot on the communication aspect. But the literature on relationships in public relations focuses a lot on organization-public relationships. So when you look at the literature, what you find is lots written on organization-public relationships, or the OPRs, as they call them. Sometimes they write about relationships with journalists, you know, in media relations. They usually tell you how to do things, how to get the journalists to do what you want to do, meeting their deadlines, etc. It doesn't actually go into the interpersonal aspects. And there are very few, if any, references to interpersonal relationships with colleagues in public relations or with clients. And it's this client relationship that's a major issue. I'm going to return to that a little bit later. So I'd like you to think about the types of relationships that we can have in the public relations profession. Because we obviously have relationships with friends, we have it with family, we have it with our neighbors, we have all sorts of different relationships. We don't study all those different relationships. We study the relationships that exist in public relations, because that's what I'm talking about. Another thing that is always very interesting is we assume that relationships must be built and maintained. And the literature doesn't really talk ever about ending relationships. When they do talk about ending relationships, it's with a little bit of, maybe we shouldn't, because it's a bad thing. But I will talk a little bit later about that as well, because ending a relationship is not necessarily a bad thing, and sometimes it's a normal thing. So the state of interpersonal relationships, and just bear with me a little bit. I might seem like I'm jumping around just a bit, because I'm talking about people, communication, and which comes down to interpersonal relationship. And I will return again to this organization public relationships, because that's an interesting one. Those of you who've read the literature will know that we're imposing or transferring ideas of interpersonal relationships to the organization public relationships, but there are problems with that. So we take the interpersonal relationships in public relations literature, we take it for granted that public relations practitioners actually know how to build relationships or know how to communicate effectively. And these are actually skills that we should be teaching and that students should be learning. But there is little to no focus on interpersonal relationships in public relations teaching or textbooks. As I said, I'm lucky, I'm at the School of Communication Studies, and interpersonal communication has always been part of our studies or research or training, so to speak. But I think it was Jim McNamara in, I think about 2012, that pointed out, I think something like 2% of the textbooks actually spent any time talking about interpersonal communication or relationships. So that's where I come from as well. Now, there are 3 requirements for relationships, and it was interesting when, now I'll mention it a little bit later, it was interesting when Anna was saying that relationships are really things that we do, because that is actually true. Interpersonal relationships are not things that we own, it's things that we do. And to be in an interpersonal relationship, or to be in a relationship, there must be 3 things. There are 3 requirements to be a relationship. The first thing is that both parties, and most of you talked about the 2 parties, 2 people, etc. But they need to recognize that they are in a relationship. And we can talk about this a lot more. I'm not going to give you a one-way lecture the whole time. I'm just giving you a little bit of background right now. There's a recognition that there is a relationship from both sides, not just one side. So when we talk about an organization public relationships, we have to consider whether the publics actually see themselves in a relationship with the organization. Then there needs to be an emotional connection of sorts. This is from interpersonal communication or interpersonal relationships, interpersonal communication, which is where PRs borrowed a lot of their theory from. The one thing that we hardly ever talk about is the emotional connection that exists between the parties. And then we have to take each other into account. And many of you mentioned that when you talked about mutual benefits, reciprocity. So you need to take each other into account for a relationship to exist. So I wanted to end with that one. Relationships are things we do, not things we possess. And that's a very important point to remember. All right. Now, I've got some questions. Okay, that I just want to set the tone for today's discussion. Is there are questions that we should be asking about relationships in public relations, but we never actually do. And one of the first ones is, can we exert control over relationships? If we can't own a relationship, and there are things that we do, can we exert control? So I'd like you to think about that so that we can have some discussion on some of these aspects, because really, I guess it's one thing for me to talk about that and share my expertise or semblance of expertise. But to be a scholar, you really have to start questioning some of these things. To be a thinking or an effective practitioner, you have to ask yourself those critical questions. Can we exert control over relationships? And can we transpose the principles of interpersonal relationships to organization public relationship? That's a really crucial question in the literature that many of them have pointed out. Can we end relationships? Should we? Must we? Okay. That's another question. How do we see an organization's publics, as people or as things? And that kind of goes back again to dialogue. And I don't know if Michael is going to talk later about dialogic communication, but do we see organization publics as people or as things? Because that influences how we interact with them. Do the publics actually want to be in a relationship with us? And Damien Waymer actually talked about the non-voluntary relationships. Not all publics actually want to be in a relationship with an organization. See, I'm going back to the organization public relationships again.
Should we jump in if we want to, or wait?
You want to jump in? Can I just finish? Oh, yeah, jump in.
No, it's fine. You can finish the slide.
I wanted to just finish the questions,
yeah,
but then jump in. I've got like one question. To what extent are organizations emotionally involved, or vice versa? And what implications, if they actually are? If your publics are emotionally involved, or your clients are emotionally, what are the implications for that if we're looking at public relations? So yes, please jump in now.
Well, just to go back to one of your earlier, I think the previous slide, your first claim, I think, I'm not sure I'm entirely in agreement. The yeah, so recognition of both parties that there's a relationship. You know, many years ago, and I think ICA Dijon Verchik had said that when I, have a Coke, I don't want a relationship with Coke. I just want to have a Coke. And so there's this, you say recognition of both parties if there's a relationship, but I would argue that often people don't recognize there's a mutual relationship. We might recognize that as PR professionals, but like when I go to the local store, the clerks don't understand that I'm going to come back here every day, for 2.5 years. I just moved, but I went back to IGA, twice a week, 3 days a week for 2.5 years. We have a relationship, not just a financial relationship. If you're not nice to me, you don't treat me with respect, I can go somewhere else. So do we really need to have mutual recognition, or only really recognition by one party?
Well, this is an interesting thing, because this comes from interpersonal communication. And interpersonal communication says that those three things should be there for a relationship to exist. So the question that I would have for you is going to the store and speaking to, let's say, the checkout person. Is that a relationship? If it is a relationship, is it an interpersonal relationship, or is it a different type of relationship?
Well, I mean, I would say it depends. Initially, I would, when we were talking about it, Anna ripped off my work. I was going to say work when we were defining relationship, but relationships can't form unless somebody. If you go back to the basic relationship building model, someone has to say, "Oh, let's have coffee, let's have lunch, let's talk." So somebody has to try that relational move to move the relationship forward to a greater stage, it requires the movement on one part before the other person realizes there might be a relationship. And then for me, the disposition, you know, like two items on a shelf, as you mentioned, or mathematics, there's a relationship. And I think that that shouldn't be overlooked, that relationships aren't simply, even an interpersonal relationship isn't simply a recognition of others. Watzlawick, Bevan, and Jackson talk about dysfunctional relationships. And in those, you have got parents who treat their children as others, even though they live in the same household and their parents.
Well, I think the issue here is that there are different types of relationships. So when I go to the store and I go and shop and I say hello to the store lady or whatever, I have a transactional relationship with them. So it's a bit of an economic model that takes place. So I go there, I buy the store. If you maintain good relationships with me, then, you know, if you're nice to me, if you're not rude to me, I will go back. You don't have to be nice to me, but preferably not rude. Mm-hmm. But it's transactional. So the type of relationships that I'm talking about here, or that I'm going to talk more about, is what we call the role relationship, where a public relations practitioner is actually in relationships with their peers, with their clients, and that's not necessarily a transactional relationship. It's more based on the roles that they fulfill. So I guess if I go to a store and I just buy, I could see it as a transactional relationship, maybe also just as a role relationship that comes with a different set of expectations. So I would, I'm the customer and they're the salesperson. So I expect the salesperson to turn to me and to say to me, can I help you, for instance? Yeah, I want to buy some nice outfit or something like that. I don't just go in for a transaction because, you know, I want them to turn to me. I would get irritated if they stand on the side and no one helps me, because the role that I expect them to fulfill is to help me.
Right. Now, I don't want to monopolize the time, but I worked in retail grocery before I went to college for many years, and I actually would say it's more complex than that, because I'm willing to bet you go to the same store every day for years, you've got checkout clerks that you like better than others. And a lot of people would rather go stand next to, and even though the line's longer, they don't like the person. Like, we had a checkout clerk in Tennessee who was just incompetent. And we knew that if we got in the other line, no matter who it was, we'd be out faster, even if her line was half as long. And so we made choices about that. And then we get to know them and we might talk to them every day. And so I just think that this is assuming, I think, a specific kind of relationship. The interpersonal literature, I think, is assuming a particular kind of relationship. But I do think it's not subtle enough to account for the complexities of other relationships.
No, it's not. But then neither is the public relations, because that's why I had this picture up there. If you can see that there at the back, with the complexity. It is very complex. And actually, when we were writing the book on relationships as well, we had some difficulties unteasing some of that. This is what we eventually decided on. But I agree, it is a very complex area to look at, because there are different types of relationships, there are different expectations of relationships, there are different relational structures. The moment you put two people together, they have a different set of expectations from each other. And I don't think any of the literature can really give us all the answers to that. But the public relations literature, on the other hand, seems to simplify it and says, this is how it should be. And it makes heaps of assumptions that actually are not quite. I'm just going to check the messages, because I see they're popping up, so I'm not quite sure. Or have you got the messages, Michael? Do you see the messages? Is there any questions? I can't hear you. You haven't got your, there you go.
Yeah, there's been a few comments back and forth, but I don't think no one's jumped in with a question. But I just posted saying, jump in and start asking questions, don't let me do all the talking.
Okay, I'm sure they will at some point. Okay, but those are critical questions that it keeps on changing it, it's fine. These are critical questions that we do want to ask. I mean, those are critical questions, and the same questions that Michael is asking as well. Those are questions that we should be asking. We're not actually asking it. And so we're not driving forward some of the theory around it or identifying the complexity. So I want us to look a little bit at the readings. I'm hoping that some of you might have read it or at least had a look at it. I picked those readings for a very specific reason. So the readings that I sent through, Michael said to me, I really need to add more readings. I will just blame it on you, Michael, because I'm quite particular about not giving too many readings because I know people just, I don't know, the world's changed a bit. It seems that we don't have time to read anymore. But I've given you those specific readings, Coombs and Holiday, Willis, Zaharna. They about 5 years old. But what I found interesting about them is that each of them offers a different perspective and each of them asks different questions. And as I told my postgraduate students as well, is in order to be a critical thinker, to be a better practitioners, because many of you are going to go into practice. Some of you will go into academia and you want to be good scholars, and others want to go into practice and want to be thinking practitioners, is you need to challenge those questions. You need to ask the hard questions. I don't have all the answers. And the questions that Michael said, we probably can spend 2 days debating it and not have an answer at the end of it. But different perspectives open they open debate. They challenge some of the dominant paradigms and they crystallize changes. And it's good for people it's tough. I mean, when someone asks you a tough question, you don't always have the answer. But usually we go away and we think about it and we go and find the answer or figure out how it is. I use the one of the elephant. I think you're all familiar with it. And by the way, all the images that I use are copyright free. I take them from the Creative Commons specifically for that. So it's not an infringement on anyone's copyright. But that is the elephant. You know the metaphor of an elephant, that someone looks at the tusk and goes, it's a spear. And this one says it's a fan. And someone touches the body and says it's a wall. So we all see different aspects because we're colored by our experiences. Okay, so that's why I picked those 3 readings. They're heaps of readings on relationships, specifically organizational public relationships. And if you're interested in, for instance, measurement, you find articles on how to measure relationships. You find articles that explore the theories of relationship. So there's a lot going on. So I'm going to ask you the first reading, Coombs and Holiday. I want you to share some of your ideas or takeaways from the first reading, if you have read it. So just jump in, put on your microphone and just say, or hold up a picture if you want.
I'll jump in a little bit because I really like this reading. That was the first one I read, and I was thinking about it for a long time, but I never really tried to learn more about this information just because I didn't have enough time. But that article really resonated with everything I've been thinking about, that weak relationships are still important, and there's this idea of parasocial relationships, and there is nothing like mutually beneficial relationship, because really strong relationship is benefits the organization. But my question from all these discussions was about, how do we understand that we actually have a relationship? when this realization comes, okay, about the end of the relationship, I kind of, from my own experience, can understand this. Okay, that's it. We don't have a relationship now. We don't talk with each other anymore. That's it. I'm over you. Bye bye. But when do I understand that? Okay, now we are in a relationship. Like when this, on Facebook, in terms of interpersonal relationship on Facebook, usually people sometimes have like status. Okay, in a relationship, and usually means something. But when is the real relationship start if we speak about the organization?
So you're asking me, when does a relationship start with the organization, or when?
Yeah, like when can we have a mark that, okay, now we have a relationship? And this is a rhetorical question. I mean, it's not only to you, it's, I guess, to everyone as well. It's a thought not only on the readings by Coombs, but kind of thought on all the readings that we've done.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at the interpersonal relationship, it goes through phases, and I'm going to highlight some of the aspects of phases. Some of the things that Michael brought up earlier is, the reasons why we start relationships. When do we have a relationship? Well, supposedly we both know we have one. Which is where I'm contradicting Michael again. But supposedly we both realize that we have some form of connection or relationship. And if you read the other one from Rhonda Zaharna, that's an interesting one, because for most of us, we don't consciously think about when we have a relationship. We just accept we have. And so yeah, I don't know if anyone else has got some suggestions that they would like to share. When do you think you have a relationship? Anyone?
Can I jump in here?
Yes, of course.
So I also found that the point about parasocial relationships quite interesting. So for example, I live in Australia. I am supposed to have a relationship with the government, and I don't choose that government. But this relationship is very much dependent on my observations of how our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, interacts with Australian people in general. So it seems that this relationship is based on my parasocial interactions with him rather than my direct interactions with him. On the other hand, I also watch how Jacinda Ardern relates to her people. So in that sense, I can't say that I have a relationship with Jacinda Ardern because I am not governed by the New Zealand government, but I can evaluate whether she is relational.
So it's interesting. That's what Coombs and Holliday talk about, the whole idea of identification as well. That's part of relationships. Okay, anyone else? Yeah, sorry, Lisa. Yes, Lisa, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like this is something that is worth examining in public relations research.
Yes, I agree. Shima?
I think that my understanding was they argued that the relationship identity of public relations had somehow limited the field and its progress in academia. For example, they're talking about the importance of weak ties, which is ignored in close relationships. For example, they say that weak ties are very important to increase resilience of people, because people have a variety of options to choose among. They also talk about identification, which might be different in interpersonal relationships and organizational public relationships. And also they say that the relationship metaphor has originated from interpersonal relationships. So, but there might be many differences between organization, public relationships, and interpersonal relationships.
Yes, and that's one of the key issues. Bob Heath also talked about that there are some problems with transferring the interpersonal relationship model to organization and public relationship model, because what Lisa was saying, for instance, if I understand it correctly, is that she has a parasocial relationship with the government. She doesn't really necessarily want to have that relationship, which is, you know, kind of a non-voluntary relationship. But the prime minister, who's a representative of the government, doesn't know that Lisa has even any relationship, right? Do I understand that correctly? Anyone? Oh, yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have interpreted it really nicely.
Okay.
So one thing I was sort of struck by in this was I feel like the line between personal and organizational relationships with publics is sometimes blurrier than perhaps the readings allowed. Though I think the chapter 8 conclusions sort of address that somewhat. But if I'm a representative of an organisation, and I'm coming from 15 years of practice, my relationship with individuals when I'm representing the organisation can be both personal to me and also, but I'm also acting on behalf of the organisation and with my organisational hat on. And I think that ambiguity really needs to be teased out a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's actually, and we're jumping a little bit ahead, but that's one of the things that we found. So we decided eventually, when we were teasing it out, to base it on the role relationship. That because what we found in our research is that practitioners, for instance, want to work with people that they like, but then there is the issue of you want to also get an income in, and you want to get your future income in. So there's an economic model that takes place, etc. But in many cases, likability is a major issue. And so they start a relationship with a client because it's all right. But the way they talk about it, we know that eventually they will become friends with that client as well. So it moves, it blurs very often between this is my role as a practitioner, giving advice, telling you what to do. And then at the same time, you kind of like them too. So you become friends. You might even hang out and go and have lunch and have a beer. So I think that's where you showed that that's not teased out at all, actually, in the literature sufficiently. Yes, Anna.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to this is that I think a little bit that we have this bias in the sense of likability, is that if to have a relationship, we need to like something, and this is only the time when we have a relationship. But I also feel like sometimes you have a relationship when you just kind of stuck with this company, and you just gotta work it out somehow. You might hate this electrical company, but you're gonna go and try to make things work because you just have to. So I would say let's think critically also about this bias of likability, in the sense that it's not always positive, and it's not only about liking, but it's about something else. It's about, I guess, commitment is a good word as well, right? But again, I guess we also need to think, because it's complex, of the strength of the relationship, and to what extent, and how much you're really stuck with this company, and can you go somewhere else?
I think one of the issues that we have in literature as well is that we conflate the idea that we can have a relationship with an organization with the idea that, or with the reality that we actually have relationships between people. So we have relationships with a representative of the organization, not actually with the organization itself, but the person represents the organization. And so we think we have a relationship with the organization, but it's actually with a person. If that person goes away and someone else replaces them and communicates differently to us, our view of the organization is going to change. It's like if, yes, oh, there you go, Michael.
No, actually, I think that's an excellent point, because marketing and advertising in particular want to speak of building relationships, and they mean nothing like what we mean by building a relationship. And I don't have a relationship with the electric company or with anybody else. I have a relationship with people. I have a relationship in the sense of we share something in common, we share proximity, but there is nothing beyond that. And I think that's important, is that we recognize that and not sort of fall into this trap of saying, you know, OPR is all about organization, public relationships. There's no such thing, you know.
It's between people. Yeah, and that's the thing that when Helen and I were writing the book, that's really something that we struggled with, and we ended up addressing the organization public relationship because that is so prevalent in the public relations literature. But it's like no one understands that we actually have relationships between people. And that's why, and especially in social media, it's very obvious. I mean, the organization responds to you, but it's not actually the organization responding to you. It's someone who works on behalf of the organization, and how good they are depends on what message goes out there. Yes.
Well, not necessarily, because right now there is this artificial intelligence, and I'm not going to say the percentage that companies use this, but a considerable amount of time it's not an actual person who responds to you, but it's a chat bot or a bot, whatever sort of bot it is, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I would argue that through bots and chat bots, that this relationship is still built because you're connecting and the organization is being helpful to you. And some people, they are not comfortable speaking to other people. There are some sensitive topics that they might not want to share, and speaking to a bot is actually an easy and a better thing. So a person would come again and again and again to get help, because this person doesn't have to interact with the real person, but he or she can interact with the company.
But you see, that's an interesting one, which obviously you brought this up, so I'm mentioning that. That's another field of research that we need to look more into. It is, what does artificial intelligence actually do in terms of building relationships? And in our class, and Prashant and Rahul might know this, and Sharon, we talked about AI, and we actually started touching on those issues, because what implications does AI have for organizations, for instance? I mean, if you think you're speaking to a real person, but it's actually an AI, you know, where's the transparency, and where are the things, the basic principles of relationship building? Where is that in there?
Yeah. Can I just add something that's sort of, it's similar, but a bit of a tangent. I'm interested also in how relationship management software and databases can relate to this. So particularly in community engagement product, we have a database on projects I work on, where you can see summaries of every previous interaction from my colleagues with this person. So before I pick up a phone to call someone, I don't have a direct relationship with them, but they have a relationship with other representatives of the organization. But I'm going into that interaction with more knowledge about the person, about their context, and about the history. So it's not a direct I guess it's not.
It's complex.
It's complex, yeah. And it's not as though I'm entering into a relationship in a brand new clean slate way. It's far more nuanced than that.
Exactly. And we've got a problem, or even in scholarship, there's this issue that we want to put everything into models and in tidy little packages. And I was thinking about that when I was preparing it, because we just want to make sense of all this complexity. And so we narrow it down to these specific models and steps, and, you know, 3 things that you need to recognize there's a relationship, etc. You know, and I see Michael nodding his head, because you know, he's talked about it before, that we simplify it to the point that we lose the complexity, but we're still struggling as human beings trying to communicate the complexity. Otherwise, no one's going to understand what we're talking about. So you know, it's a tough one. And those are very good points that both of you actually raised. Anyone else who want to raise something? Just looking down the list. No one? Anyone who wants to say something about the first reading? And then I can summarize it. Okay. All right, I'll move on. So just for those of you who haven't read it, it basically provides an overview of the relationships in public relations and the key challenges. And they give it from a very specific point of view. They highlight some of the problematic foundational assumptions, such as strategic intent. You know, if you go out as on behalf of the organization to deliberately message or build a relationship, it's usually to the benefit of the organization. Also, they talk about identification as a basis of relationship. For instance, Apple users who relate to an organization based on the product. They actually don't have a relationship with the organization, but they think they have, you know, because they identify with the organization. It fits their own identity. The idea of close relationships and the weak ties, which was raised a little bit earlier. And then, of course, because I also like languages, actually my two majors were communication and languages. And I always find it fascinating how we take a word and we seem to think that everyone understands that word exactly the same way, when actually we have different pictures in our head. So linguistic choices, Coombs and Holliday talk about mask organizations' true intentions, which is to strategically influence their publics, to strategically influence by building relationships. And they then conclude in the end that the relationship identity obscures actually more than it reveals. And they say, and this is very important, they say that the language of relationships was adopted without an actual commitment of relationships. And we have a similar issue when we talk about dialogue. And I don't know if Michael's going to talk about that in the future, but have the same issue. We talk about dialogue, and Hyria, if Hyria is still here, are you still here, Hyria? I don't know if she's still here, but we looked, some years ago, we looked at how practitioners were talking about dialogue, and we found they talk about dialogue, but what they're describing is actually persuasion. So we adopt the language without an actual commitment or understanding of what it is that we're adopting. So the second one, Willis. Anyone who's read Willis? Preach wine and serve vinegar. That's why I've got those two visuals there.
Yeah, Willis argues that what we talk about in research is different from what we see in practice. And he conceptualizes it as doublethink. So he brings two examples that we talk about listening in the literature, but we don't see organizations actually listening to their publics or their stakeholders, and also about relationships.
Yeah. Someone else? No? No one else has read it? Or you don't want to share?
I've read it. I just
you didn't connect.
I think that was a great summary.
Okay. This is of course another thing is we don't always connect the same way with the ideas, and that's why it's also important to read quite widely if you do studies, because sometimes you might read something and you just connect with it, or you go, I don't get that, I don't agree with that at all. So I will just summarize a little bit on what he said. He refers to public relations doublethink. And he takes...
I have another understanding of the paper, and that is the importance of case study in social sciences. Willis says that the difference between practice and scholarship originates from how we look at social sciences and public relations in particular. We want to behave in social science like natural sciences, so we try to predict things or use survey or other popular methods in social sciences. But what is important is to see how people actually make decisions in different contexts. And so he suggests to use case studies.
Yeah. And one thing that I pick up from this study is the important context. So different relational techniques and tools should be applied to different contexts. And this makes me think about Coombs and Holliday's study as well. So they talked about how the concept of relationship is not applied in crisis communication. And I have been thinking about why it's not applied and why, or perhaps why it cannot be applied.
I think that's a very interesting point. I thought that was interesting as well, crisis communication, and that warrants some further research and see if that is actually true. And why is it not applied? Why don't we apply the principles of relationships in crisis communication? Why is it something different? Maybe it's because we see it from a publicity point of view. And that's something that we actually also picked up in the book, is that where we speculated that because public relations has got its roots in persuasion and publicity, that they don't really practice dialogue, for instance. They have no idea how to do that, and because they're not trained. That was one of the things. So yeah, anyone else? Okay, I'll just continue. So the public relations doublethink. For those of you not familiar with George Orwell, it might be worthwhile, specifically when you're in lockdown, to read George Orwell. You'll find that a lot of the literature often refers to 1984. If you don't particularly like reading, there are movies as well that you can watch, which is interesting. And I recall the last time I saw 1984, I thought it was pretty close. It's very disturbing to watch, but it's worthwhile if you've got the time. I kind of prefer Animal Farm, because Animal Farm shows human nature. And if you don't know the story of George Orwell's Animal Farm, is they oust the humans being humans because they don't like the humans. They don't think the humans treat the animals well. So they get rid of them and they say 2 legs are bad. And eventually the pigs take over and the pigs start walking on 2 legs. And suddenly 2 legs is good again. And to me, it's always representative of how the world functions. I don't know if you...
Story of my country.
That's where it comes from. That was his, his inspiration at the time. All right.
Postman in Amusing Ourselves to Death makes the comparison between 1984 and Brave New World, arguing the Brave New World is actually more representative of what we have. Although I think we're seeing a shift now with all the surveillance and everything else back to 1984.
The idea of Big Brother obviously comes from 1984, and so most of us know about Big Brother is watching you and seeing what you're doing. Yeah, okay, so he also argues that the relationship was adopted as a move away from the profession, from managing perception. So again, it comes down to this persuasive, we want to talk about relationships, but like Coombs and Holliday said, there's really no commitment to it. It's a bit of doublethink. We talk about relationships and then what we practice is not relationships at all. We don't adhere to the principles at all. He addresses specifically the idea of listening and dialogic communication, and he shows contradictions in what organizations do. And he points out, as we said earlier, surveillance is not listening. So when we watch and we listen, we actually just surveilling. We just, and the idea is to use that so we can persuade people better. And I particularly like his serve and volley communication. because that reminds me of so much social media interaction of the idea where someone posts a question online and then there's an answer and that's it. Okay? So you serve and you volley and it's all good. That's not really communication or interaction. That's just, I'm responding to your question, and sometimes if you're lucky, some organizations don't. And of course, the other thing that he points out is organizations only listen to the things that actually interest them. So they don't really want to hear what you have to say. So they get quite upset if they hear an advocacy group or an activist group raising an issue that they don't particularly like, because they're not interested. They're only interested in the things that benefit the organization. Anyone wants to jump in there? You think that represents organizations? If you come from practice, maybe?
Just to keep banging on the same drum, but I think that's overly broad, and organizations are just so vast in their different relationships with their publics that I think it is overly broad. I think governmental organizations have a very different relationship to their publics than non-governmental organizations.
I suppose because government organizations are also taxpayers, they're supposed to be representing the general publics. They're supposed to listen to them. However, we did find, even in New Zealand, that the government organizations do not always listen, and they certainly do not engage in dialogue necessarily. That's what we found anyway in New Zealand. And it's always different because organizations are also led by specific leaders who influence the organization's point of view. And so if they genuinely believe in consultation, then that will be practiced throughout. If they don't believe in consultation or listening to the audiences, if it doesn't serve the interest, then they won't practice it. That's,
I'm interested in this. Do you think listening is only truly listening when it has the potential to change an outcome?
No, I don't think so. Because I'm also, one of the things that I'm interested in as well is dialogic communication or dialogue. I think we have to listen to things that we don't want to listen to. It's the same thing as if you look at scholarship. If you only read things that reinforce your own point of view, you're never going to move forward with theory because you're not challenged in your ideas. And it's the same thing with communication. We want to listen to other people as well. We must listen. We don't actually want to hear people who disagree with us. Most of us don't. We only want to hear people who tell us how wonderful we are. But in order to actually have a genuine relationship and genuine dialogue taking place, we have to listen to things that we may not want to listen to. So I don't think listening is just about things that we, have an interest in. Yep.
I'm just going to jump in and play, I don't know, devil's advocate or whatever you want to call it. It's about dialogue. And because you also like language, I'm just thinking, to what extent we're helping the theory building when we add to this concepts like engagement, dialogue, relationship. What are the big differences between all those concepts? Thinking from the perspective of the organization, of a practitioner, when I worked for companies, and I worked with the PR agency, so we had all different clients and all different relationships and different things we had to work on. You just said that we have to listen, and we have to listen to what we don't like. But what do you do when your publics don't want to listen what they don't like? Because organizations, they're also stuck at needing to satisfy and to keep people happy, because people have choices and they don't have to stick with the relationship. We are the ones who are stuck with them, and they're not the ones who are stuck with us.
they can have this weak relationship and actually can get out of this very easily. But we're the ones who have to, keep them happy and not tell them anything that they're not going to like, and keep this relationship existing. So I'm not sure to what extent
it goes both ways.
It's just, I feel like we, from the scholarship perspective, I feel like we're coming up with all these ideas, and I agree. Like, I'm all up for this. That yes, mutual respect, dialogue, ethics. Yes, we have to love each other and help each other, and find compromise. But when it really comes to working, there are so many challenges that are out there. And working as a public relations practitioner, actually, many times felt myself like there is only that much I can do. How I'm going to talk to people who don't want to talk to me? How I can help them if they don't want to be helped? How can I build a relationship if they don't want to have a relationship? So I'm trying there to do all these kind of things and genuinely care about all these things, about dialogue, engagement, relationship.
This is one of the questions that I think this is one of the questions that we should be asking. Is really, we talk about relationships, but do we want them? Do we need them? Should we call it something else? Should it go a different way, etc.? I'm conscious of the time. I didn't realize that we're already busy for quite a while. So I'm going to move a little bit on. And if you can't stick for the whole period, I won't take offense if you need to leave because there's something else going on. Rhonda Zaharna was the other reading. And to me, I found that, of course, a really interesting reading. Who read her work on relationships?
I loved this reading. I found it so interesting.
Yeah, because I really like the fact that she unpicked and she really put her finger on something that most of us who are outside America have known this for quite a while. Is the idea of the autonomous individual is really an American construct. And I'm just, apologizing to all my American friends, but it's a really American construct. The rest of the world does not think that way. And I think if we look at how COVID-19 is managed across the world, that also shows that there are different social political forces at stake or going on. So Erin, do you want to say something that you took away from that?
I just found the idea of the very notion of relationships being subjective and very culturally driven to be just so important. And it naturally made me wonder about where Australia fits into this. And I think often Western countries get lumped together with the United States. And I'm really interested in kind of thinking about that and wondering trying to figure out where Australia fits in this.
Yeah. Does anyone else, maybe from a non-Australian background, not Australian, non-American background? Sorry.
Yes, my understanding from this paper was that most of the literature has the US bias. So, actually studies that want to take this bias into consideration, they rely on collectivism, individualism construct, while there are many cultures that are not merely individualistic or collectivistics, like New Zealand, which says that has both individualism and collectivism simultaneously. And I think the most interesting point in this paper was that the literature assumes that there is no relationship and tries to build relationship through communication, but there is some relationship out there that might influence communication.
Anyone else? Anyone?
Petra, can I just jump in for a minute?
Of course you can.
Actually, 30 seconds. I've not actually read the paper, but I do know Zaharna and I've read her other works. And this collectivist, individualist, and all of that. I mean, one thing I can reflect is it's all about your personal culture. If it's culturally driven, and a lot of the time it is, then I think it's got to do with person to person, how that's handled, and person to a group. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why it's so complex. Because as a PR practitioner, if I were to relate to a client, say, representing their group or a group of people, then what's going to happen is each of us, with our cultural similarity or differences, will then go away and deliver the message, whatever that message is that we receive from each other. Do you know what I mean? Through the process of dialogic understanding and listening and all of that goodness. And I really feel for Anna when she was going, you know, all this lovely relationship building, ethical communication, all of that stuff. I mean, what happens to people in practice? And I think that's the jewel of theory, that in practice, we just take a step back because we're so highly subjective. I mean, the relationship is so subjective that we can take a step back and look at the whole thing somewhat objectively. You know, I mean, that's my take on it anyway. Does that make sense?
Anyone else?
Actually, I think both of those comments sort of tie into the same issue, is that I think organizations sort of exist with this schizophrenia, where on the one hand, they want to be, you know, organizations and autonomous and have free will, but on the other hand, they want to be, you know, interpersonal people and have relationships. You know, the paper I did recently with Brandon Boatwright, where we looked at crisis and argued that scapegoating is an unethical crisis response strategy. And another paper I'm working on with Stephanie Mahan, where we're looking at social media crisis, gets at this whole point where organizations want to sort of have the ability to, you know, strategize, treat other people instrumentally, use whatever is in their best interest, but then at the same time want to say, oh, but no, we have a relationship and we care about our stakeholders and publics and we have something going on. So there really is, I think, and maybe it's a management, a communication versus, you know, management issue where the people are not trained in communication, don't understand the complexity of it, and it's our job to help. But there really is a schizophrenia that goes on.
Yeah, that's pretty much sums it up. Anyone else? Okay. So just to summarize, basically, many of the things that you've said are actually spot on. Relationships are not understood universally the same. We can't assume that the meaning is shared. And also, she explores 10 of the key assumptions about public relations, like the communication relationship link, because many of us don't make a distinction between relationships and communication. She also points out that this Eastern-Western divide is an oversimplification of really complex issues, that American thinking is not the same as European thinking. And those of you who come from Asia will know that people in Malaysia won't think the same as people in China, because just because they're in the East doesn't make them the same. And so she talks about the social cultural context, relational sphere, identity, commitment, etc. It's a really interesting read that just really hones in on this idea of the autonomous individual. That's an American construct, and all our theory is built around that you want to be independent, and that dialectic, I guess, between interdependence and independence is always there. And she suggests relationalism as a way forward, where we look at specific personalized relationships or relations. So we focus on the relationship, not on the people, not on who it is, but more on the relationship itself. Okay, now just to summarize this one, and I'm going to go through it briefly, is based on video ethnographic research, the readings 4 and 5. And I'm not going to ask you right now what you think. I'm first going to tell you what I think, because, you know, I'm one of the authors. But what we found was that people who are really effective in all modes of communications or effective practitioners know all forms of communication, okay? And they're really good at it. And we also found, and this was one of the key takeaways, we talk about relationships, we talk about dialogue, but we really found that the everyday focus is on message production and minimizing risk. And that stood out in all the samples that we looked at, is it really was about minimizing the risk of the organization. There was very little, even the most effective ones did not spend any time thinking about relationships or relationship building. It was all about minimizing risk. Even when they engaged with the community, and there are a couple of samples where they did that, it was about planning beforehand how to minimize risk and how to communicate to that group. It wasn't really, yeah. So, and we also found that there were four key relationships. Well, that was a lot of debate, okay, to be honest with you. We teased this out. We had many hours of discussion. And we found that at the core of all public relations activities is really relationships with the colleagues. They are the ones who decide what's communicated and how to shape public relations. So even though we talk about organization public relationships or media relations or whatever, it's really the people who practice it that define what it looks like. And we talked about relationships with the clients, the client relationships, which is none of the books talk about that, with journalists and with publics. And we regard it as the peers, as the center of it all. Okay, now you can ask me questions in a minute. I'm just going to very quickly browse through that, and then we can have a free discussion until Michael calls a plug and says that's enough. So these relationships, as I said to you earlier, are based on the roles. That's what we decided we were going to do, is we're going to base it on the roles. And each of these relationships is unique. And this is where the relational structure comes in. But the phases are the same: the establishing, the maintaining, and the ending of relationships. Here I'm a bit schizophrenic as well, because I talk about that relationships are just part of life, etc. And here we talk about establishing and maintaining relationships again. Okay, so there's some examples, and if you can't see this, let me just go down and move down. Establishing relationships, those of you who know interpersonal communication will know that there are many reasons. There is the economic model of relationships where you want a reward out of it, and that could be like information or jobs or whatever. Personal motives, because you're kind of bored and you want to build relationships. Proximity, sometimes you build relationships just because you are in each other's present, not because you particularly like each other, which, you know, addresses the issue of liking. And perceived similarity and likability, again. And self-esteem and developing personal influence. So I'm just going through that, and I will ask you to respond in a little while and tell me what you thought. So there are many reasons for establishing it, and also people to establish, organizations establish relationships to survive. Okay. So the question that we had, is this all about self-interest relationships? And we talked a bit about maintaining relationships, reciprocity, which covers some of the things that you talked about. Favorable impressions, we found that people really were very much into impression management in PR. And memorability, paying attention to other parties, self-disclosure, etc. I think all these slides, yeah, I can make the slides available to you. I mean, Michael is going to put up the recording, but I can show you the slides so you can look at that if it goes too fast. But we found that mutual understanding and mutual benefit can be established through dialogue and persuasion. Now, Haria will know this because we wrote about that as well. And relationships aren't free of persuasion. And the same thing that Michael said, there's always a need to balance interdependence and independence in relationships. Now, there's some signs when a relationship ends. I'm just going to go through all these. You might end a relationship because your goals have been achieved. Or these are not reasons, all of them, by the way. They look like a nice little pretty flower, but they're a mix of reasons and, well, signs of why relationships are ending. You might end a relationship because, the interactions have become too boring or rigid. And then you might start reducing self-disclosure. You might take away control. The client might take away control from you. There's an escalation of cost. I'm no longer available. So I'm too busy to talk to you. That's all a sign that relationships end. I think these are probably stuff that you could, kind of figure out. It's not really that complicated. But relationships end, and we have to ask ourselves in public relations whether it's okay to have relationships ending. If you understand the signs of when a relationship ends, then you can actually start thinking about whether it should be ending, or even strategize about how you might end a relationship. Maybe to address that issue that Anna brought up earlier, if you're working with publics that you really don't, that make your life really difficult, maybe you want to start strategizing how you might end that relationship so they don't affect your work that much anymore. That might be another strategy to go for, rather than talking about we must have relationships or must improve relationships. Maybe you just want to end it. I was going to talk about deception in relationships. Hopefully, if you read chapter 8, you would have seen that deception is actually part and parcel of what we found. And we had some heated discussions because I'm sure Helen would appreciate that. She's a journalist by trade. And we had some really interesting discussions because I practice public relations about this issue of deception. And deception occurs when we knowingly and intentionally mislead the other party. And we found that actually happening quite a bit in public relations practice. Firstly, exaggeration and untruths can happen when we try and do a bit of impression management. So we want to increase our likability. We want to get the client to work with us. So we sort of kind of a little bit, exaggerate our skills and abilities. The most common forms of deceptions that we found in public relations were omissions, and there are heaps of forms of deceptions. Everything from flat out lying to just, just manipulating or managing the truth, massaging the truth a little bit. The most common form of deceptions were omissions, not telling, just leaving certain information out, not saying that you know certain things. And they're actually quite common in relationships. Evasions, where the practitioner would evade the question as not to answer, maybe because they know the implications of that answer. And sometimes just strategically withholding information knowingly. Remember, deception is about knowingly and intentionally misleading the other person. It's not about because you don't know or you kind of just, you just trying to be tactful or whatever reasons there are. So I have a question for you, and that's probably one of the last questions that we will cover before Michael is going to say that's enough, is do you think that deception in relationships, and specifically public relationships, is justified? Anyone who wants to venture into that?
Can I please start?
Oh, you can start.
Thank you. So I'm thinking that individual practitioners are guided by their individual key performance indicators. And according to the public relations evaluation framework, they are supposed to contribute to outputs and outcomes. And these outputs and outcomes are supposed to subsequently contribute to organizational goals. So to some extent, if we are guided by this framework, then then they might have to justify like not disclosing certain information, because that could contribute to better outputs and outcomes.
Yeah, that could be a good reason. Someone else?
I'll say something. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll go next.
Okay. Based on the readings, I think face work is also an issue if you want to be polite and protect others' face. Maybe it is crucial to apply some kinds of deception to behave professionally.
Yeah. Because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or you know what the outcome is. Yeah, that's a form of deception as well. Rebecca, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if we're going, if you're just simply asking, is deception justified? I'm going to say mostly no. We actually discuss this a lot in our classes, and I'm sure you all do too, and you've thought about this a lot. But my biggest argument to that is public relations is supposed to be building communications. We're supposed to build relationships. We're supposed to thrive in those relationships, and they're supposed to be mutually beneficial, hopefully. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but that's my take. So like Petra, with the background of psychology, social science, and then also looking at like interpersonal communication theories, such as like uncertainty reduction theory, that's all about giving of information and not withholding it, or a lot of that theory, excuse me. Sorry, a lot of that theory, you know, is about giving of yourself and not deceiving, not lying by omission and things of that nature. The reason that I would say deception for the most part is not okay is because, to me, if you're deceiving, you're doing exactly the opposite of what public relations is supposed to do, which is build relationships. Because on an interpersonal level, if you deceive, eventually that relationship is going to falter, it's going to fall because of that deception. So what I try to teach typically is, you know, we back it down to interpersonal communication strategies and what you would choose to do in those things, and or in that type of strategy. And I guess a lot of people maybe would deceive in interpersonal relations, but then if you're asked the question, how does that serve the relationship, most people will actually admit that most of the time it's detrimental to the relationship. So if you look at it like that, as you know, it's truly relationship building. Public relations is that in and of itself. Deception doesn't belong there.
Yep, Michael?
I think too, if we go back, if we think about Sproul's new managerial rhetoric, the idea of organizations communicating as sort of autonomous entities. I mean, this is what we were talking about earlier. An organization isn't a person. And organizations shouldn't be deceiving us or lying to us or tricking us or not telling us the complete information. But interpersonally, we do it all the time. As Shima suggested, we might smile even though we don't like somebody because we're having an interaction with them and we know we're not going to make a nasty face or let them know we don't like them. We might not achieve our goal. But obviously, as Rebecca was saying, in a relationship, if you're deceiving people, your partner, if you're not telling the truth, if you're, lying to somebody, that's a bad thing. So I think we do have this sort of dual level where the organization as individual representative is not the same as the individual as communicative entity. And then us as individuals have to be aware that we shouldn't be lying to our stakeholders and publics. We shouldn't be deceiving them. We shouldn't be tricking them. But at the same time, again, interpersonally, we have to, you can't get around the fact that interpersonally, the idea of dialogue, unconditional positive regard, I cannot like somebody, but I still have to treat them with respect and kindness. So there is I think there's multiple levels here, I guess that's all I'm saying. There's the organization, the person, the individual, the relationship.
There's a certain level of the reciprocity affair. If you like a person, they like you back, that type of thing. But then it's also, I guess there's a certain level of, there are levels of deception there, and this is where we had some really interesting discussions, right, talking about this, because if, for instance, you're dealing with a client and you don't particularly like the client, you can't actually show that you dislike the client, because you're going to lose the client. And you might not like them on a personal level. So, Rebecca, I see your point where you're coming from. I get that completely, but I think an interpersonal level, it often happens that we do have to withhold or deceive. Maybe straight out lying is wrong. And I think the code of ethics shows it's wrong. But there are levels of deception that take place. So I think it's probably a little bit more complicated, or a little bit more gray, 40 shades of gray that happen in that one. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to chip in a little bit. That's a very hard question about deception. My thinking is that if we are not going, and then again, I'm just playing devil's advocate over here. If we are not going to deceive at all, like if we think about relationship as a process, like long term, not just one time interaction, but actually like over the years thing. If our first interaction and we meet a person and we just give out this person every single thing that's like about us, hey, hello, I have this thing and that thing and that thing, we don't even give a chance for the relationship to form. And over the years you can work out something and you can actually become a better person. So I'm not sure if you really need to give out everything right away, all the bad things and all the good things, and even for the client, but when you talk about the client, I mean, some things you don't know, or some things you're still working on, or so you might have had some experiences and you don't have to tell the client every single experience you've had before. So I guess it's the level of deception. It's like what information you can withhold, and this is going to be considered deception, and what information you can withhold and it's not going to be considered deception. To my mind, deception has a negative connotation.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that just withholding that information that might not be essential is actually bad. I don't think it's bad. It's actually respecting another party as well, because that party is not going to be overwhelmed with all the information that it's out there.
Yeah, I think it's probably a lot more complex than that. It's deception does have a negative connotation, and when we talk about deception, our instinct is we don't want to be deceived. We want to have the truth. Which brings me to a question that I want to ask. Do you think that you can detect deception? I found that a really interesting part when we were writing about deceptions, because initially I was quite hesitant to write about deception, because like Rebecca, I thought, it's not okay. And I don't even want to talk about how deception takes place in practice. However, deception does take place in practice. And we saw several examples of practitioners, for instance, dealing with journalists who they know a long time, and the journalist asked a specific question, and the practitioner had the background to that, but he couldn't disclose it, because if he disclosed it, it would damage the organization. Now, it wasn't maybe essential at that point to disclose it. Nevertheless, there was deception taking place. So my question to you is, and just say yay or nay, do you think you're good at detecting deception? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself? Let's start with the people who haven't actually said much. Cindy, How would you rate your level of deception detection? On a scale of 1 to 10, is it a 1? Is it an 8?
I think probably 5.
5? Yeah, fair enough. Let's go down. Rahul, just give me a number.
Maybe a 3. I am really gullible, so.
Oh, okay. Well, that's at least self-insight. Prashant?
Contrary to Rahul, I'm slightly cold-hearted, so I would say like a 7.
7? Lisa?
It's hard to answer. It depends on how much I trust the person, but I would say 3 generally.
Okay. Tim? Just give me a number. I can see you unmuted your mic. Okay, I can't hear you. So maybe it's not connected. Okay. Erin?
I'm such a Pollyanna. I'm like a 2.
Yeah. Michael? I can't hear you, Michael. You haven't unmuted yourself.
You should be able to read lips, though, with all this training. I think also I am fairly untrusting of many. So, but I think it changes. So I think, on average, I'd say 7 or 8. But I think with someone we trust, with someone we like, it's going to be much lower. We're not going to be suspicious of our partner the way we're suspicious of some stranger.
Yep. I don't know if I missed anyone out. I think some people might have left because it's quite a long session. Yeah, I probably would rate myself like a 7 or an 8, because, I'd like to think, especially when you're face to face, right? We're better at face to face, right? Yeah. So there's a thing called truth bias. And we actually grossly overestimate our abilities. So those of you who say you're like a 3 or a 5, you're probably more accurate than the rest of us who say we're a 7 or an 8. We grossly overestimate our ability to detect deception because our confidence it doesn't actually reflect our ability. And most of the deception is actually discovered after the fact when we start putting all the information together. And this is an interesting thing. Those of you who work in public relations practice will know that a lot of practitioners, especially in New Zealand, like working face-to-face. And in face-to-face situations, the truth bias is actually a lot stronger. So we tend to judge a message on the side of truthful as opposed to deceptive. So we're assuming that the person is telling us the truth. So we tend to err on the side of truth, and especially in face-to-face situations. So we actually found that that's why in many face-to-face situations, we knew from the background in the research that we've done that they were actually very able of strategically withholding information or evading controversial issues because of the relationship they had with that party. So yes, if you trust the other person, you always, and that builds over, but again, that adds a layer of complexity. So you know the person face to face, you talk the person face to face, you probably like them. So there is really a truth bias taking place. And that's why when we trust a person, if they want to deceive us, it's a lot easier for them to deceive us. And in the profession, what happens is that we build relationships, we build them face to face, and that means most of the time we're truthful, but when we're not truthful, it's easier for us to deceive them. That's basically what it comes down to. So any final comments? It was a long session, wasn't it, Michael, for all 2 hours? Any comments that anyone wants to say? This is basically, or anything you want to add, or what you took away from reading chapters 2 and 8.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just because we didn't have the rest of, and I haven't read the rest of the book, was most of your research based on agency work?
Yes, a lot of it was. It was working with practitioners. No, actually, the one was an agency and the other one was a government organization.
Okay. Do you think there's a difference between the way these things apply in an agency context versus in-house? I just wonder if organizations can sometimes outsource their deception.
No, not really. And we're talking specifically about interpersonal deception. We're not talking about an organization putting out false information or deceptive information. We're talking about interpersonal relationship because that's what we based all the research on. That's really what we said was the core of it all, is the interpersonal relationships. We didn't find a difference. We did find that the really good practitioners were very good at, for instance, strategically evading some tricky questions, withholding information, strategizing how they would deal with it. And they were regarded as very good practitioners, and they generally were very ethical in their practices. So it's not that they were unethical. To add to that, because I think that's probably where you would go to the next question. But yeah, but the other chapter that we wrote was on the organization public relationships, and a lot of that had to do with was actually a government organization and a certain issue that they were dealing with, and there was no dialogue, no consultation really. They called it consultation, but it wasn't really. It was about minimizing risk. So we didn't find huge differences. We focused on the individual practitioners. Anything else? Any other?
Yeah, may I add something? I think if we look at relationship building from the activist point of view, I mean, activists practicing public relations, a lot of arguments might change. For example, Willis says that we are talking about relationships and listening in the literature, but we don't see them in practice. It might not be the case in activist groups because their existence relies on building relationships. So if we study relationships in the context of activist groups, we might actually see that there are real efforts to build relationship with people in different groups of publics.
So are you saying that if we focus on the activist groups, it will be, we will look at relationships from a different perspective?
I said that if instead of sitting in a corporation or a governmental organization and see how public relations practitioners build relationships, if we see it in activist groups, for example, voluntary activist groups, and see how members of those activist groups or leaders of those activist groups, actually how they as public relations practitioners practice public relations and build relationships, we might see that they actually build relationships with different people in different groups of publics, or we can see that they really want to listen to their publics because their success actually relies on building those relationships. Because in contrary to corporations and governmental organizations, activist groups don't provide any product or service, but their product is the social capital that they can build in order to advocate for their cause. So building relationships is very essential in activist groups. So what Willis says that we cannot see public relations practitioners actually practice listening or build relationships. In activist groups, I think in reality we can see that they really do attempt to build relationships and listen to their publics.
Okay, so that's within the people who follow the same issue or the same cause, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. But those are people that follow the same cause, and I'm just wondering if they were engaging with someone who did not support their cause, would they still be willing to build relationships?
Actually, it is the topic of my thesis, that identity of activist groups is not something that is fixed, but it may change based on what other groups in society want. So a member of an activist group might change the identity of the activist groups based on listening. So, for example, a corporation is what it is. It produces a product or provides a service that is very difficult to change. But in activist groups, their identity is based on what their public wants. So they might change their identity in ways that other groups in society identify with them and join them and support them.
So there's more dialogue taking place.
Yes.
That's where it's going. I see Michael smiling. So yeah, he's your supervisor. So yes, so more dialogue taking place. That's interesting. Yes, that probably would shed a different light on relationships as well, and how we see relationships. Yeah. Someone else maybe who wants to say something?
I mean, I just can chip in that I'm not sure about ending relationships. Sounds like a bad thing, in the sense that that's
what everyone says, but is it a bad thing?
That's what I'm thinking, is that why would you need to end it if it's a good relationship? I mean, you can still have it. You don't have to communicate, right? I mean, because you can, it's something you have it, right? You just have it. And even when the goal is achieved, you can move on to another goal, but you still have a relationship and you can come back to this client, person, public later. So I'm not sure if the relationship is good and it's positive, you need to end it. It may die out with the time if you don't interact, if you don't communicate, but you don't necessarily need to end it. You really end relationships that are dysfunctional or, you know, bad relationships, and they're affecting you in a negative way. This is the time when you actually end them. But but other than that, I'm not sure about goal achievement and things like that.
Sometimes it can end, but I think maybe thinking about it in terms of that the structure will change. So even though let's say you're a practitioner and you have worked with a client and you've done the work, the goal is achieved, you like the client, maybe in future you will take up more work with a client, but the relationship structure will have changed. The nature of the relationship will have changed. So even though you might continue it, it will not continue in the same shape. That's what we were talking about, because if you like the client so much that you become friends, you're no longer in a role relationship. You would have become friends. So you continue a relationship in a different form. So I think maybe, again, there's more complexity to it, that it's not just ending a relationship, it's maybe ending the relationship in that specific form and moving on to a different form or a different relational structure. So it's something to think about. I think it's interesting that we say that it's bad to end relationships unless it's a bad relationship. Sometimes relationships end for whatever reason, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's maybe just life.
Maybe it's a language issue, though. I mean, rather than ending, they transform. So, I mean, like I had a bank in Oregon when I was a graduate student, 25 years ago or 30 years ago, that was great. If you were going to Oregon, I'd tell you, go to Ueno, couldn't count with them. They were great then. I'm sure they're great now. I haven't talked to them in 30 years, but I still have that relationship of trust. We've got friends we might not see for a decade, and we can still get back together with them and connect and talk. And so I think that's the sense that I think for many of us, that's like, why would we end that relationship? What's the point of it? But I think actually you're more, at least it sounds like you're more referring to when the relationship changes or when the relationship transforms rather than when it ends.
Well, the literature talks about ending relationships, and because interpersonal relationships often talks about personal friendship, you know, that type of relationship. But even if you think about professional relationships, it could be that people move away to different jobs and they're just not close enough to maintain contact. So it just fades away. It comes to an end. It's not that you deliberately end it, it comes to an end.
I wonder if there's a thing like dormant relationship or active relationship, you know, like that's something that you possess. And because yes, I totally agree with Dr. Kent. When you have friends and you haven't talked to for decades, but you still have that relationship. I mean, I don't have to talk to my best friend sometimes, but I know that, I mean, they're there for me, and anytime I need them, they're going to be out there during the night, during the day, in another continent. They're going to come and help me out because you know, and even though I didn't communicate with them as much lately, but I feel like there is this like, I like the idea of transformations. I think that what you're pointing out is a perfect word for this, but really ending relationships sounds like something bad. But the transformation of relationships, maybe it's further building of, okay, what are different transformations, not like types of relationships, not like roles of relationships, but transformation of relationship. Okay, active phase, whatever, you know, like not active phase. I mean, maybe something to think about.
Yeah, but in public relations scholarship, we don't ever even talk about anything to do with changing relationships, ending it, or whatever. We just talk about building it, creating it, maintaining it. And we kind of scared when we go ending, because that's a bad thing. Maybe ending it in the shape that it was, or transforming it. Yeah, we do need to look at the terminology and the way it goes. Yeah, I see there are a lot of messages coming through. Don't know. I'm not going to pop that up. But I guess we should start ending it, shouldn't we, Michael?
Yeah, we do, because I have, in the future, I think what I'll do is actually allot 3 hours for these. And then if we get excited and we're having a lot of fun and we, you know, and we want to keep going, we can keep going. But today I've got contractors and Maureen's looking in, like trying to give me the like wrap up. And so I think we need to end our relationship for today.
Yeah. And it was fun talking to you. I enjoyed hearing your points of view and your engagement. And feel free to email me if you want to, or I'm spending a lot of time in front of the computer. I know all about Zoom and MS Teams. So if you want to do some FaceTime, let me know. You know, just email me.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, and Shima and I are going to continue, but I think she's logged off. I think she'll probably come back because we have to.
I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Petra.
And